Hi, Alison Marsden here from Gardening by Design. Welcome to this box of tricks nugget, highlighting a few of the facts that you need to make the most of your garden. I do hope that you enjoy it.
Ways to beat weeds. You'll be pleased to know that this is not a video catalogue of weeds, nor a treatise on what is a weed and what is a plant. Any plant that invades your space and that you do not want is a weed, and you will want to remove it. Generally, we're talking about plants that spread rapidly. You don't need my advice on how to dig out a single rogue specimen. I find that understanding things in a structured way helps me to work in the garden most efficiently, and this is particularly true of the war on weeds. Each weed, like all plants, has particular characteristics, and understanding these helps you to deal with it once and for all, not again and again. The three-pronged approach is to identify how the weeds grow and spread, remove them in an appropriate way, and then reduce the chances of new weeds taking hold. You do not need to identify each different weed by name, but it helps to know what type of plant it is it an annual or a perennial, and how it spreads, as this determines how and when you will treat them. Let's look at the type first. An annual plant germinates, grows, flowers and sets seed between spring and late summer in a single year, and then the plant dies. If you want to avoid a repeat performance of those weeds next year, then what do you have to do? Well, you have to stop the plant producing seeds, and that means deadheading or hoeing off the plants, more about hoeing later, before the flowers fade and seeds start to form, and ideally get to them before they flower at all. The roots can be left in the ground, because the plant will die off in autumn naturally, roots and all. Perennial plants also flower and produce seeds that can grow into new plants, but at the end of the summer they do not die completely. Many perennials lose their stems and leaves, but the roots and crown remain alive and dormant through the winter. The same plant regrows next spring. So what is the key difference in the treatment of perennial weeds? As well as making sure the weeds do not produce seeds after flowering, you also need to dig out the whole plant, roots and all, or it will simply regrow back, and you will revisit the very same weed next year. We've just seen that both annuals and perennials can spread by seed, but there is a group of perennial weeds that also spread in a less obvious way, and this makes them a real problem to get rid of. Anyone who has ever dug up something looking like this will know what I mean. These are the white underground stems of couch grass and link apparently separate clumps together. Couch grass, bindweed and ground elder are the most common examples of this, and the stems can be found well over a metre underground to spread the plant past an obstruction, such as a path or driveway. The particularly bad news is that even a short section of these underground stems left in the soil can root and shoot and create a new plant. Now that you know what you're up against, it's time to decide when and how to deal with the weeds. You will know by now that stopping seeds being scattered by the plant is key, and time is of the essence. Dandelion flowers are a good food source for early insects, but it makes sense to pick the flowers off once they're spent, even if you do not have time to dig out the whole plant there and then. So clearly, there are different ways of dealing with different weeds, and as you would expect, using a suitable tool makes the job easier. I make most use of a hoe, a hand trowel and a garden fork. Hoeing lifts small weeds out of the soil completely and slices through larger ones, severing the roots. This is why you push the blade of the hoe horizontally away from you, slightly below soil level. Most efficiently used where you're growing vegetables or flowers for cutting in straight rows, and you simply walk along between the rows, hoeing the ground. If you are facing perennials with a taproot, dandelion and dock are probably the most widespread, then individual removal is needed to avoid wrecking the whole border. I use a hand trowel, sink it vertically down beside the plant, and then you can work your way right round the plant and lift the plant taproot and the whole plug of soil out in one go. These underground stems need to be dug deeply, The way to avoid more collateral damage to surrounding plants than is strictly necessary is to use a garden fork, a long-handled one. This enables you to loosen a large area of soil and start to lift out the central clump of the grass or whatever, and follow the underground stems, loosening as you go to get as much as possible out of the ground. The only other option, and the one often recommended, is to dig everything out of the border, get rid of the creeping weeds, and replant what you have saved. And finally, when your borders are fairly clear of weeds, you can start to work on reducing the rate of recurrence. Any suggestions as to how? Weeds are green plants like any others, and need nutrients and water from the soil and access to sunlight to germinate and grow. Prevention is simply about denying one or more of these, and the most reliable way to deal with all three is to make sure that there is no bare soil, either by covering any spaces between plants with mulch or simply by closer planting. Here I have mulched around my roses with a 6 cm layer of garden compost mixed with leaf mould, but any loose, well-rotted organic material will do. Not only does it exclude light from any weeds and seeds in the soil, it also retains water for the roses and tops up nutrients. You often see bark chippings laid over a fabric membrane in street plantings like this one. This fabric, often called weed suppressant membrane, does keep out the light but lets water through into the soil. I use this for paths and work areas, but not often for planted borders, as it does have some disadvantages. Firstly, once installed, you cannot add new organic matter to the soil. And secondly, over time, the bark chips and fallen leaves decompose, and you end up with a layer of organic matter on top of the membrane, into which weeds happily establish themselves. You then often see the fabric exposed too as a result of this. The other way to exclude weeds is for the plants to outcompete them and leave no space. This herbaceous planting, backed by shrubs, completely fills the border. Even if there are a few weeds struggling away underneath, you don't see them, and they will never get much by way of sunlight. The key to success here is to choose plants that are ideally suited to the situation. Plants cannot outcompete weeds if they themselves are struggling with unsuitable conditions. This border is less tightly packed with plants, but you still cannot see any weeds. Instead, blue-flowered forget-me-nots are allowed to self-seed and fill any gaps. Now I know that forget-me-nots are sometimes thought of as invasive too, but they add flower power and have no deep tap roots or underground stems to fight with. So I think they make a great alternative to weeds. So we have looked at the three-pronged approach to beating weeds: identify, remove and prevent. But it would be unfair to suggest that this is a once-only activity. There are always seeds floating in or being dropped by birds, and bits of pernicious underground stems left undetected. So keep a lookout and don't let the weeds win. There's more information about how the box of tricks can help you to plan, plant and look after your plot on my Gardening by Design website, where you can also buy topics and sign up for the newsletter. I hope to see you again soon. Happy gardening!